Okay, well, I am at 10:44, so why don't we go ahead and get going, since time is of the essence. So welcome to now our second virtual panel of our virtual pre-conference for the 49th Annual LCLC Conference. And this is an experiment and a work in progress, but although I think we're all getting used to the Zoom reality, I do hope that that we can meet in person for the gala 50th next year. And with that said, I'll go ahead and introduce our three poets. I hope that Jake will join us, but we're going to begin with Jim Berger, who is a senior lecturer in American Studies and English at Yale University. He has published 2 academic monographs, After the End, Representations of Post-Apocalypse, University of Minnesota Press, 1999, and The Disarticulate, Language, Disability, and the Narratives of Modernity, NYU Press, 2014. And also, he writes with both hands here, 2 books of poems prior, 2013 from Blaze Vox, Under the Impression, from the same publisher, published more recently in 2020. The Midwife and Conduit is how he describes himself for the OBU Manifestos, volumes 1 and 2, from Dispatches Editions and Spittoon Devil, 2017 and 2019, and is currently completing a prose book, Inhabiting the Future, Notes on Continuing Life During Crisis. He is, of course, recording secretary for the Unacknowledged Legislators, Poets for the Planet, Percy Shelley, executive director. And we will then have Dennis Phillips, who's the author of 18 books of poetry, most recently 17 Meditations on Time, Magra Books 2021, Mappa Mundi, and I enjoyed my copy. Thank you, Dennis, for sending it. Talisman House 2019, and from the same publisher, Measures 2013, and Navigations, Selected Poems 1985 to 2010, Otis Books 2011. His work, both poetry and commentary, regularly appears in various national and local poetry journals. His first 3 translations, works by Millie Graffi and Susanna Robidi, came out in 2018 and 2019 from Magra Books. In 1998, he edited and wrote the introduction for a book on the early essays of James Joyce, Joyce on Ibsen. His novel Hope came out in 2017 from Green Integer. Phillips is a professor in the Department of Humanities and Sciences at ArtCenter College of Design, where he's been teaching since 1979. And finally, hopefully Jake Rose will be joining us, a queer poet and digital artist who studies and teaches at the University of California, Davis, a finalist for the 2019 Nightboat Book Prize, and his most recent project can be read online at theartofdeath.com. And with that said, Jim, take us away. Oh, Jake is here. Great. Thanks.
Yes,
thanks so much.
All right. Well, thanks. Yes, the Unacknowledged Legislators. Back in the fall, when it still seemed conceivable that the enormous, that the Biden climate and social infrastructure plan could happen, and and if only we could eliminate the filibuster, and if only Manchin, and if only all this stuff could happen. And so some people were asking, actually prominently Kent Johnson, whom some of you may know, was, what should poets be doing? What are we going to do? And I thought, well, look at Shelley. We need to be the anti-hegemonic force that will legislate what needs to be done, and thus the Unacknowledged Legislators were born. To what effect? Well, we'll have to wait and see. So I was able to bring in from the ether certain documents from the Unacknowledged Legislators, and I will present a few of those today. So the first one is called Inundate the Capitol. Back in 1967, I think it was, anti-war demonstrators intended to levitate the Pentagon. An amazing project. They didn't quite get it off the ground, you might say, but it was a good effort. So we're going to inundate the Capitol, and it has an epigram Admit that the waters around you have grown. And of course, we know who wrote that. That's the ancient inundator. Inundate the capital. Inundate capital. In barges, send the obvious poems, the necessary poems, the inscrutable poems, the poems made of lightning, the poems of water, the poems that resist all forms of breathing, either by lungs or gills or whatever strange organs insects possess that bring them oxygen, the poems that will help you breathe again, the obvious poems, the necessary poems, the inscrutable poems, the poems made of lightning, the poems of water. Inundate the intersections where power assembles and disperses. Send the poems in barges and container ships. Stuff the supply chains with poems. Transmit the unacknowledged legislation and the poems of anarchy, the poems of chaos, the poems of theory. Send the unending scrolling poems on the backs of joyous animal helpers, animal poets, and send the poems created by artificial poets, some of them programmed with arrogance and some with humility. Poems will fill the streets of the great cities and centers of power, and poets will wade through them continually writing more. Whitman will write to God to send picnic baskets, and Blake will write for shipments of ale, and Dickinson will contribute her endless notebooks in case anyone runs short of paper. The rising of sea level will be exceeded by the rising of poetry level, and poems will absorb the sea, and coastal cities will be saved, if only we get there first. The unacknowledged legislators achieved, and this is true, 226 signatures in their petition against plutocracy, a sad outcome, acknowledged by all the unacknowledged. The petition went no further. Plutocracy endured without even noticing the challenge that would have brought it down. Now the poets retreat to the soil and advance both downward and upward. Now they continue to goad the poets of quiescence. The poets of quiescence are a tremendous power. All the potential power of the unacknowledged legislators resides in the anxious paralysis of the poets of quiescence. What will it take to goad them? Really, what will it take? Are you one of them? Where is your small mirror in the red case that says, what am I doing today to build a movement? There really is such a mirror, by the way. What am I doing today to transmit the small incantation of sudden adherence that will make the waves liquid and solid, that will fly through the ears and all the apertures of elected rulers and present them with the alternative that has no alternative, the alternative of this is what we have to do, and we have to do it now. Acknowledgement. Thank you, poets of acknowledgement, poets of inundation. So, okay, that was that. Yeah, thanks. Oh, by the way, have you ever seen this mug? I saw this. Can you read it? Write like you're running out of time, which I didn't know where that was from. It was my daughter said, "Daddy, that's from Hamilton." Oh, okay. Anyway, this is a disintegrating ode to a senator. It's written in little stanzas, like an ode, little 3-line jobs, and then it loses its, then it disintegrates. Can it be that the coherent, rational view that served fairly well for such a long time, the useful forms and ratios that bound the seasons, continents, and oceans in patterns, holding constant across centuries, in fact, millennia, and allowed, at least roughly, for planning, the planting and harvesting of crops, building cities near rivers and the mouths of rivers, quarrying stone, building ships, conducting trade, establishing dynasties and other forms of governance, even the beginnings of democracy, that most confident mode, arrogant really, thinking that people themselves, as they are, possess the judgment to rule a state together in justice and prosperity across time? What regularities and continuities are required for that presumption? Can it be that these forms, modes, continuities of weather and geography, levels of the ocean, flow of the rivers, chemistry, the air and water, realities of soil and wind, the overall and encompassing predictability of the world, the predictability of the world, the adherence of the world to models we humans can create and place on graphs, can express through algorithms. To everything there is a season, to every season there is a set of characters. You will chase them through the grove with me, we will be pastoral. And will the form drop from under us? And will some terrains and their atmospheres find their expression in fire and other terrains, and find their truth in deluge and inundation, forking the spirit of ellipse, to, in quest to, then to, and some will, under the forming of bridge, under the gravity, sudden drop, and no lasting form of impervious. There will be war soon. Is that not also too obvious? There is not enough planet, and it has no shape. And here's where we really kind of cut to the chase. You know, how am I doing for time, Matt? Let's see, it's 11. I don't even know. Okay.
You started at 10:48, so you
okay.
relax. You've only been reading for 7 days.
So this is a little number I like to call contempt and hatred. Colossal contempt is the abbreviation for more complicated worries. How much I hate them. What it feels like to see these people free and at large, unvaccinated, with their guns, denying the disintegration of the ecosystems, plotting to destroy democracy, standing on their principles of austerity, so the poor eat dust, the state is suffocated, regulatory agencies nullified, energy companies free to extract and expel, and nothing can be done. Nothing can be done. Nothing can be done to move us out of this abyss and toward a society that is just and sustainable. Hating education, hating intellect, no sense of empathy or even curiosity toward the lives of others, unaffected by the heroic, beautiful struggles of Black people for recognition. No, hating them even more for any success, wishing always to curtail women's lives or the lives of any people with gender or sexual unorthodoxies. And their ignorance, God, oh God, how can such ignorance exist? How can a world continue on its axis with such profound, unashamed stupidity weighing on its rotation? Where do they think they came from? How do they think they got here? What makes them think they are real Americans? Their piece of dirt is the heartland. What is this country, an artichoke? Their complacency, their hypocrisy, their deep, abounding, abysmal lack of historical knowledge, their lack of basic sympathy for other lives. What the fucked up fucking fuck? Fuck it, really? Oh, and their preference for fetuses over the lives of people actually walking the earth, such people possessing complex thoughts and desires and necessities and relationships, often in conflict and contradiction, often in error, often in selfishness, often in cruelty, often getting right to the mark, often getting things right, even in roundabout ways, and not very efficiently, often with the remarkable, surprising kindness, even capable at times of broad solidarities. Yes, of conceiving that none of us are free until all of us are free, and therefore we live at all times in a state of unfreedom. What a Jew would call Mitzrayim, the narrow place, the place where the mind and sympathy is narrow, where the imagination is not equal to the moral urgency required. That's where we are. We, what we? After all this preface of hatred, my unpacked contempt, do I reach out? What would I reach out with? My hand? Do I reach not my hand to them? Do I show them my face? Do I say, I'm carrying no weapon, I just want to talk with you? I want to understand you. I want you to understand me. I know that at the deepest level, we share one heart. How can I not believe that? I believe in evolution. I know that we are one species, and the differences between individuals are relatively minor. And I am at my core rather religious, and I'm convinced that all of us share basic spiritual congruities, that we share essentially one soul manifested in infinite bodies, the same flame burning in different ranges. So how can there be hatred or contempt if we understand who we are essentially? Well, I guess there's a long way from essentially to where we actually find ourselves here in the world, in this country, this historical moment of such immense confusion. Hatred may be epiphenomenal, but it sure feels real. Okay, so we hate each other and despise each other. But it's not our better angels that must have a conversation. It's just us. Somehow, at some location, I'll meet you anywhere. At the diner, at your church, in the park, in the library. We'll have cultural exchange programs between red and blue regions. We've got to have this out. Very slow, small, and slow, piece by piece, slow, small, soon. But it's not good enough. It's got to be bigger, faster, sooner. Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, Fox News, Mitch McConnell, Jim Jordan, and the whole rabble of you fucking traitorous pricks. Now, I promised my friend Kent Johnson, the marvelous poet, enthusiast, translator, and all good things, I could tell much more, but you know what? I'm going to read it. He was one of the contributors to some of the original documents of the Unacknowledged Legislators, and when he heard I was doing this reading, Kent, are you here even? I don't know if you're here or not, but I promised him I would read one of his contributions, and so I will. It's a little ballad. It's called a holler ballad for Joe Manchin, and this is by Kent Johnson. It's not by me, although of course Kent likes to do things anonymously, so I'm outing him. I don't know whether he wanted his name. I think he does. I don't know whether to read this in a Southern accent or something, but I won't. My dearest Joe, one does despair about your soul, your pompadour. Do you not hear the tolling bell announcing your fair date in hell? I know that could sound snarky harsh because you are a family man, but listen to the troubadours at Charleston's state folkloric slam. They croon about the dying trout, the dwindling birds, raised mountaintops. They wail about the blaze to come, admittedly quite trite and dumb, and yet the child doth sway and hum. She wonders if you ponder her. She hopes and dreams and all that shit, the shit that shits like you inter. When tundra blows its gas, monsieur, you'll be forever licking yet coal barons in a sulfur pit. Too late, Joe, then to howl regret. But don't be scared, don't wet your pants. You have your secret confidants. 10 million damned Republicans will be there too, wild licking you. Let's see, I got 2 more poems, and hopefully, and that will take about 5 minutes. Do I have 5 minutes?
Yes, you do.
Okay, I'll read them both. All right, so as you can tell, I'm pretty depressed about all these things. So the poems are going to get more depressive. This is a poem called Addressing the Law, but it's really about poetic form, but it's called Addressing the Law. From now on, I was thinking, and the time has come. The time is, and actually this is, again, this is a little stanzaic poem, if you can see this. So it's in stanzas of different lengths, and you'll see. From now on, I was thinking, and the time has come. The time has come. The time is now, if time were anything to be spoken of in any polite or sociable way. And what I would do would be to focus on form, the form of poetry. I would do this because already I had tried to imagine some interface, a lousy word, some place of real, actual, legitimate, genuine, authentic, yes, connection. Yes, I think so. Some connection that would involve my language and myself, and what shall we call it, the social and political world. I tried pretty hard, though with uncertain and somewhat incorrigible results, to write poems in something of the form of missiles that would fly, as in a naval battle. Awkward stanza break there, or was it brilliant? I have no idea. Flying into the side of the battleship of oligarchy and fascism and conceptually damaging it, blowing a fucking hole in its side, right? And all its prisoners would escape, like in Fidelio or Cool Hand Luke, and the damn thing would go down. It would just go down, conceptually, at any rate. Conceptually, it would go down, and the poems would inspire others to take more practical turns and bring it down for real. Transform this world, elucidate and bring to light, shine the light on the forms of mind and images of justice and types of love that would open the door to the solidarities we need. That we need, yes, that we need. Do you understand? That we need because we do not have. The solidarities that we need to bring about the society that we want. Simple as that. The poem would announce, simply, clearly, in all its obviousness and banality, the unacknowledged legislation, the law, the true obligation that we all know but won't acknowledge and won't act on, won't enforce as law. And I thought, I've done that. I've done that. I've done that as much as I could. I want to experiment with form now. I want to play with stanzas. The world can go to hell. But there's more. Okay, the final poem I'll read is called Adapt to Dystopia, and it's dedicated to my wife, the historian Jennifer Klein, because it's on a topic that we've talked about and laughed about quite a bit. And it's also actually secretly dedicated to my dark love, Laurie Santos, the psychology professor at Yale, who of course teaches the science of happiness, which is the course that has gotten the most students of any course in the history of Yale University. Okay, this is called Adapt to Dystopia. Your life is a ruin, but it's your life. What decisions could you make better? Do you get enough sleep, enough exercise? What about your diet? Have you performed acts of kindness recently? Research indicates that having some social contact each day, even if only small encounters, will increase your happiness. Say hello to people. Make eye contact. Just say something about the weather. Give a compliment. And of course, stay in touch with your friends and family. Be the one to reach out. Right, Jess? But anyway, be the one to reach out. Healthy relationships mean healthy psyche. Be a good listener. To help others, to be kind to others, to be open to others, is to be kind to yourself. And don't keep your own negative feelings trapped inside. Trust your loved ones enough to talk to them, confide in them, be open in both directions. If you feel you need professional assistance, seek it out without embarrassment. It's all right. You deserve the help a professional therapist can give. Commit yourself to your own happiness. It is not selfishness. The more happiness you create, the more happiness you help to create in the world, including your own, the better the world. And if you think to yourself, every day the world moves closer and more quickly to irrevocable ruin, each day 1,000 more species are extinct, each day the glaciers melt and sea levels rise, arable land is desiccated, the forces destroying democracy grow stronger, the power of concentrated wealth augments, billionaires have personal rocket ships, refugees from the zones ruined by war, tyranny, and climate explode in number, and predictably unpredictable zoogenic plagues shut the world down and cull the human herd. And each day the forces struggling for greater equity, justice, environmental sustainability move too slowly, and the chances we'll make it through this without some truly terrible outcomes grows smaller. Remember that you are still a free and autonomous person, and that you still have sovereignty over your own life, and that your happiness is now and always in your own hands. Your life and mind are the refuges you seek. Reduce your stress, adapt. Ugh, that's awful. You know, I actually believe, though, that you should do all those things that Laurie Santos says you should do. You should do. But I guess you have to do more. Anyway, thank you very much. That's acknowledged legislation of the day. Right, like you're running out of time.
Thanks, Jim. So we'll continue on with Dennis and Jake. I see that you've joined us and you'll read third. Dennis, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Jim. In your first piece, I think you read, you referenced cities, mirrors, and rivers, so maybe you'll hear some resonance coming up. I'm going to read from this book, Mappa Mundi. The publisher of Talisman was very unhappy at the few sales of the first book of mine that they did. So I had everything lined up for readings and so on, and then COVID hit, so probably he'll drop me. So, anyway, the book's in 3 sections. I'm going to read the first one, which is called The City. It's in 11 sections. All of the sections have titles. Many of the sections are broken into pieces, so you'll see that. There are a few quotes. I'll try to turn my voice italic, but probably will fail. Also, it's pretty heavily footnoted, and I'm not going to read the footnotes except for a couple of them to give you a sense of what they're like. I was only going to read one, but then something Jim wrote reminded me of another of them. So I'll read you 2 of the footnotes. Apostrophe. O Muse, if I say season, you say repetition. You take the extra syllables in the songs that once sustained us and now give meager cover. Tokens of the city array, as if to prepare the defense of an argument. The city of belief, the city of ritual, do and undo, see and unsee. If I say I want to make a map, you laugh at the primitive impulse. We understand each other perfectly, and not because you put me off the whole day, then give me fleeting attention, but because we both know the drug you dispense, both yearn the give, the taking. The city of ritual, the city of belief, the city at war, the city at peace. I say it's redundant, and you tell me it's only a seasonal practice. I comb the air for minor keys. The current's too credulous. The city's foundation will always deceive us. And Muse is footnoted as follows. Your morning glance, your dew point, the arc of heaven, the huge invisible fence beneath it, your blankets fore and aft, your blankets above and below, your covers, one a bed, one a city, your hunt for latitudes and raw material, your failed invasions to set things right, your wrinkly fetus with a long gray cord, your overtures sent to the world without cover. Prelude. Foreign hills, old vines and phantoms, foreign creeks carving marble, sandstone, and haply I think on thee, and then my state records the vines and bulbs that fabricate the cloth that hung a familiar hip. The gift of low pressure, the foreign barometric, the ping that trills across the boundary hairs, the call from afar, lontano, a far desert sound, and why clothe itself in lyric? Prelude. Something slippery against the skin, the pull and keen of some distant crisis, perhaps the empire nicked on the rim of its catastrophes. Or is it just the accumulation of everything preceding marks the skin with one coil or another? Two red-tailed hawks joust and decoy. Crows surveil above and below. Tokens or islands array in a field of blue. Power is always a mystery. Before the gates, 1. This is about the ideal city and the destroyed city. Palace in smoky light, Troy but a heap of smoldering boundary stones. The places where memory resides are already known, hence the danger of nostalgia. The fold they wish to involve them, the fold that already exists, powder beneath scaffolds. What is a city without annotations, by which I mean hieroglyphs and remnants, the dystrophies of language, the codes of strata enfolding dust and histories? Dirt between the paving stones, the face pressed down in cold gravel. 2. And they who gather, gather humbly, unmindful of future study. The ribbons of their guilds and crafts stiffen under pressures atmospheric, perhaps hemispheric. And where the river bends, where the tracks pass by, where the water feeds and the basin flattens, they who gather build. And this is the footnote to go with the poem that I thought resonated with Jim's. At bend of course, bend of bay, at points of friction where things collect, where once a hermit, then a follower of herds, a planter of grasses, then a builder of mills, and finally aggregation and all of its voids and positives where needs and wants and mutualities converge, as at the river's bend or the coastline's retreat, where greed and protection, shame and justice come together, and then finally and after minutely, brain over brawn, and then that battle. Dystrophies of cities. Dystrophies of cities. 1. Nostalgia, the city's jeopardy, the empire's umbrella. So picture the grand terminal where unpardonable utterance finds purchase, where summer heat does not retard the crowds, where even high treason finds shelter in near perfect anonymity. A dozen million assassins, a rain so acid, a mile later, 6,000 miles later, the fantail view from Pharos Isle gusted upon, a voice affecting sympathy, affecting grace in a civilized vocabulary. But whose voice? Closer to home, an ocean breeze with fog on one cusp, forest fire and gunpowder on the other, threatens the stage. How uneasy the idols are, and indolent the assassins. What's overboard is overboard. Let's not elaborate, at least until the outcome's known. 2. High tide licks shallow steps, folded path to the city's center. Not a view of Venice, but perhaps a theme recurrent, perhaps an ideal city, or the memory of a mountain range encircling an embedded lake. A town of women on ladders tending walled gardens, smooth legs of passages to water's edge, of worn piers, bottomless boats. The villa high above, aristocrat's dominion always in sight. The messenger, the errand boy, the man they send to get you, maintains an awkward silence. Thus only fog's reliable, and when it lifts, mountains surround you, and the lake is blue and fresh. Later, it's springtime. You've read the history. Later still, a different lake, Catullo's villa, the same mountains, and you remember the steps. You've seen them gusted upon, lapped against solidities you only assumed were tenuous. 3. The city at war, the city at peace. How do you divvy that one as your jets circle, as your drones wander? Who are the Jews now? Is this construction the measure of your civility? Can one edifice be the measure of your claim on memory? We once saw those without buildings or crops or ships as barbaric. Now we spin gold out of gold. No longer are there walls to fight before, or black-hulled ships on which to plow wine-dark seas. And though we grow too much, we cannot eat the harvest. 4. The city is not the storm moving over it, not the light that edges its skyline, angled and irritated by pressures invisible to the grateful and the rueful. The oracle says, voice is narrative. Bullets spray, but one bullet arcs. So narrative reigns in the city at war, that's also the city at peace. 5. What if by city we mean country, but also the alleys, the transgressions, the hidden passageways, the transgressions, the private city carved deep into a mountain's granite cleft? Not so much country matters as city-state, though the polis demands its libido fulfilled, damned to its moving parts, its nomenclature, its bend at the waist. The city of missiles, the city of straw. The curve of river that brings fertility and the inevitable erosion of the curve. We live in a city, but this one has streets. Housed in a mirror, that's us looking. On civilization. Place the scales in a god's hand. So many days to the way station. The scale pinned to a fulcrum's tip. Pans once scallop shells, fulcrum once a bedpost. Parcels paced and parcels sorted, so many days from the city. The kind of pack the snowbound ranges bring, hydration's hope, the desert's scale. That parcels and snowpack are not just gauges of survival, but fears of contagion and measures of corruption. From here, picture a wall of mountains, but a brown dirt desert parched by virtue. Picture altitude and proximity, cold and western. When emergencies run flat and the distance between the lights of alarm and the plane of the rear view is imperceptible, hold still. Humidity, relative or absolute, is always reductive, as if there could be an emergency of volume. Having pondered alloying metals, one necessity of civilization, and the word polytropos, one expression of urbanity, in a cooler air column that the prophets claimed, the ghost in the curtains is only one proof, only a tribute to seeing. Gate to the city, prelude. Doors close in the daytime. Storm in a single sheet subsumes us. What are we to make of the repetition? A wave of benthic ghosts dominates the upper reaches. What's to become of the effigies they deposit, or their equation of rationality? Storm sweeps over in a single sheet, like waiting on a corner for unknown travelers. Or is it you who waits? Or are you the stranger? Planes drone above, the corner a counterfeit, Doors close, gates open. What gives the time-space problem an anxious edge? Try not to reference the season or acknowledge the voice high in the background. Some travelers arrive with questions. Others seem wistful, bored, or it's the dull moon, the tangle of voices, the chorus of birdsong push the corner counterfeit. But stray no further to the tilt of axes. Old patterns gang dry. A storm sheets through. Eventually the boards warp. Light breaks the seams. Above, squirrels find vectors among oak and hemlock. We regret the construct, but the oracle proffers narrative. And we're left to ponder distinctions we can't help but receive, and thus careen full speed. A constraint born of superstition leaves us doubting the one sensible story. Streets, monuments. 1. The city loomed by shadows. Silence edges itself, and against an air mass advancing. And do you call that an alleyway or a boulevard, or is there confusion between voice and material? The timer runs low. Almost afraid to think that a city is a city because not everyone's at rest at once, nor are all motives good. Who's left to wonder at all we do, while as yet the cool and temperate wind of grace, where vocabulary bursts under the skin of a different story in a different book? Almost afraid to look up the distant roadway quiet enough to seem separate. A street named for a river system named for a street. While the city sleeps, a narrator's voice, deep and assuring, over music slightly martial. And perhaps that's the point. The city must always have an army. 2. Street dormant, street awaken. Wind sound, then mechanized hum. Inside nothing stirs, and outside passing machines leave phantom murmurs. Street awakened, dormant street. 3. The city as beacon, the city as dust. Come to the sifter, where body parts and landing gear granulate, where essence doesn't equal the thing, and the sand of collapse can't be sintered whole, no matter how complex the compound. Shards are different. The city fragmented, the city signaling. 4. You can't tell the players without a program, or the epochs without their buildings, palace, castle, cathedral, bank, markers that set the boundaries. Clear day in the city of towers and dark. Castles a distant continent removed, palaces abundant but private. Among the banks, cathedrals still stand, dwarfed by the towers of commerce. And speaking of acoustics, ex cathedra, what's the seat if by seat ears might be met? From the chancel, the nave's a megaphone, and in the bank tower, towards which direction does its altar face? Where's the seat ex cathedra, and whose voice is it? The city as vector, the city as cul-de-sac. Vicolo. Press your face against the glass. Forget local history, you who rail against forgetting. Forget recriminations, just feel the cold flattening and listen. The early summer's crepuscular light through mulberry and gold medallion shade brightens, then dulls the koi pond. Shifting scrim, mottled dark and clear over succulents and pavements between observer and the city. Landmark with remnants. Shadows of cranes on green volcanic lake and tiny birds too high up in the currents. Mark what? What's the rhythm in the background? Who's left to marvel at all we've made and unmade? How can we begin to define the city when the pressure to euphemism drives discourse, when the fear of an acute gaze meets a militant need to bury it in pleasantry? Hold close to your civil defense and public works as dogs howl at a deficient moon and tree rats run to their poison. Drums or voices deep in the background. To those locked in the second circle, amor, canulo amato amar, perdona. Sensation always trumped vocabulary. Due respect to Spicer. Who's left to analyze the hieroglyphs we've left? The city abandoned, the city enshrined. Coordinates. The windows face before and after. As clouds, despite prediction, unroll, parchment weighted at the curls. The break you know must come, comes at the pause in the telling. Space enough for one fixed foot, and one that far doth roam. The patterns you know to look for, never still enough to pin. Later it's possible to question principles, to query and also know the response. Legend as catechism, details so often different from facts. And the strangers pouring through the gates, what of them? Graffito. Beauty demands reciprocation. Power, wealth, more beauty. Beauty wants to be matched. The pull and keen of distant crises, and yet will go unanswered. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis, very much. It was, that was very engaging and enjoyable. And we have now Jake, and hopefully we'll have lots of time for conversation after Jake goes. Jake, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew, and thanks for putting this together. And especially to James and Dennis for those wonderful readings. I think there's a lot to connect to. James, and I think I'm in your club of unironic like mug literature. This just says create full stop. I found it at a Goodwill and it really spoke to me. And Dennis, one of the lines in your reading when you said power is always a mystery, I think that is going to be one of the best avenues to the sort of reading that I have for everyone today. But first, I want to say that I'm particularly grateful that we're able to do a virtual reading. I was wrapping up this project last summer, sort of digitizing it and making a website, and a mentor asked me, after I had sort of labored over this for a year, what the experience of making the book had cost me, sort of psychically or physically. And I wasn't sure, and I said I would get back to her later. And then the next week, my health rapidly declined, and it turns out that I had gotten a virus, not the coronavirus, which damaged nerves in my brain, which has led to all sorts of physical complications, and made it impossible for me to travel to Louisville. So when my mentor gets back from her sabbatical, I will finally have a great answer, a hyperbolic answer to her question. And I also have a very good reason to be glad that we get to do this virtual reading. One of the least fun side effects is that I sort of lost the ability to read anything longer than a couple pages. And as a poet, I'm always thinking about like, what's the last poem that I'm going to read before I die. And so wherever I go, I carry around like my favorite books of poetry, just in case, like, you get into a car accident and you you pull like a little Paul Celan out of like a tiny compartment, and you can get like one stanza, then you can pass away happily. You know, for this project, it means that the last book I read was this book, The Art of the Deal, which is a horrible book. And so I'm hoping that I get better quickly and I can like slot in another more palatable book, just in case. So I'm going to share, I'm going to drop in the chat the website. By all means, you don't have to, but if you wanted to follow along, the website on the front page, if you scroll down, has sort of a digital copy of the book that I'll be reading from, or if you want to just use that to kind of peruse, look at the book, get a sense for it materially. The basic premise was that a couple months into the pandemic, I was trying to find some way, as we all do, to sort of make this immaterial experience material, like how to kind of write into or write around the kind of immeasurable grief and loss that we are all going through. And my first reaction is always like find a book, turn to a book. And so I found out that the number of pages in The Art of the Deal is the exact number of days in a year, and that the pandemic started around January 20th. And so it could conceivably take, you know, that could cover until the next January 20th when the new president would be inaugurated. And so it could be this way of cataloging the sort of year of the pandemic. And so what I started doing is on every page, I would write down the date, and then I would write down the sort of cumulative death toll at the bottom, and then I would erase the page. And over the course of the book, it sort of creates this, you know, a little camp, a little dramatic, but like, you know, some type of interior monologue from the persona of the supposed author. And the sort of additional interest that I had in this book, not just that it had sort of the right number of pages, was because it was sort of the book that created the sort of narrative of the president that we were so familiar with before 2016, of this sort of successful businessman, deal maker, and also because the sort of ghostwriter, Tony Schwartz, who actually wrote the book, in reflection said it was the worst mistake of his life. So that also made the text compelling to me. So I'm going to start from chapter 3 and read to chapter 8, and then maybe do like one of the later chapters in the book. So if you wanted to follow along online, I'm going to start on, I think, for the digital page 39, but I also go through pretty quickly. So if you don't want to keep up with that, that's okay. All right, so chapter 3 is called Growing Up. I learned from my father, who was a hard drinker of dollars. He always wanted to work instead of our family, and eventually we cooked and cleaned ourselves. Marianne, Elizabeth, Freddie, and I. That period led to pressures and a black eye, fists of adolescent mischief, very close to beautiful, channeling my aggression and privilege into delicate balance, hunting for my father's anything. He'd say, look, see your money? Jump in. I coined briefly the idea of college. It was a little rough for my brains, no room for brick and glass to touch, for a world enthralled by opposites. The newspapers seemed troubled, disaster of times and words, the poor crammed into their trailer, disappear into the night first, and a beautiful white feeling of warmth and grease lulled me through the hours. My philosophy is dare to keep crying. I'll give you an example of an incredible mouth, an act to knock on weakness, to strangle, to burn, to fight, to walk blithely into a magnificent whip. The result was that life happens less and less in America, and one day it's being surrounded by people who enjoy cutting throats. The country was anxious. Next, the dark clouds coming into vacant apartments. So I waited. I continued to jokingly divide the talk from the streets, the blondes from the drink, the hours from the misgiving, to be almost, for example, afraid, to delay the government with anything, even the minor guilt of disaster. What do you think about loyalty, privately, about your hospital bed? The future kept me abandoned and my dreaming dangerous, like old railroad yards. If you want to be endless, belong to the money, be subject into perspective. Remember to smoke the story through the city and the winds blow it higher. The situation turned from bad to much worse. The state announced some headline about the crisis, and I had to raise my profile. I decided to call my first news conference. A ton of reporters raised some eyebrows, but I don't care. I said the crumbling federal approval was just the tip of a wonderful location, christened by the opposition. Things moved fast and nowhere. Instead, the horrendous visions of man uncontrollable, the future of the West, as I watched, turned into a catastrophe, squandered to teetering on the verge. I was trying, as a matter of fact, to spend the heart filthy, to keep it naive. But as the months went by, the stakes rose. I had to convince the banks that I was moral, so I stalled. And by spring, we were pretty far along. The truth was a monster, terribly full of new terms. It dawned on me to be very enthusiastic and say, yes, I agree. People were wary of rough estimates by then. Our pitch was push very hard that death overruns us all. Nothing seemed to work. Steadfastly, hope rested in the middle of most people. My case was deteriorating fast. Worse than the days was the evidence, clear proof, but I concede nothing. Critics said I was in charge, but one day the dread was. When you look back, it seems almost hard to believe our numbers, how bad things were projected to be. Motivation was practical. We went public with our plans to cover up and don't tell. In New York, people were going nuts, and in DC, everyone began to change. Our covenant with the world was closing, and I know I hurt some people, but I have no regrets. Time began to build into a tremendous and bitter line, and later, a face of sheer persistence. A ruthless bottom line shows you somebody else, different, and trouble had a lease with my mind. Every move I made was scrutinized. Listen, to reason, walk away from reasonable people, and hope a great skyscraper was reluctant to work. A big percentage of everyone was feeling terrific, I pointed out. Even so, tiny little windows of horror began to open up, and the long run headed in only one direction. One long year of breathing, circulating a double-edged sword. Such risk thrilled me to the top. Everyone was skeptical of the light, the air, the congestion, and the people. I began to see the world as tenants in a very big building with one key that I hid. Ha ha. In other words, the power of the most influential institutions was worse than our big trick to blame others, simply because bruising life is sweet underneath, and art long after was heavier than we thought. I knew I'd become a symbol of everything evil, but ironically, the whole controversy may have ended up being a plus for me. In truth, it probably says something perverse about the culture we live in. I'd begun to realize that you want people to feel very dramatic and different, no matter where you stand, a sense of drama. I didn't want to lose my safe and homogeneous wonderland, to gut the mystical aura of Trump. Time stole my good facade, finally. It came off as just selling fantasy. The morning announced its bargains, and every star cut. I got married to the rumor of screaming and throwing bottles. It was a reverse sales technique. What can you say about America? They seem to like self-serving political leaders, the market free for emergencies, and we knew, of course, that people were lost. Not every evening, no matter how soft and buttery, came out okay. My case was vulnerable, but in my mind, favor had improperly refused me, and I was so outraged, meaning that I had no intention of changing. We had a problem, and there didn't seem to be a way out. The news still stunned. Sobering as a small desert town, the feeling of despair moved in like a vulture. I thought I'd stay on the sidelines in the lesser known wind. The worst of time often creates a potential funnel into an almost perverse attraction. I envisioned myself squeezed in a puzzle, rotting, the pieces all closing in, almost delirious from exhaustion, pressed to my silk suit as I watched the bloodletting. Once you've begun, it's very hard to say no. After me, in a way, you can never trust anyone, and that is a promise. Our intention was to build a slot machine to satisfy public question. Why not take maximum advantage? The gaming thrilled me. Oh, America, I don't think you understand that we had no virtue. It was almost too good to believe. I still believed in hell as a hole you have to bid on in New Jersey, but I savored it as the bottom dropped even lower. That assured I'd sleep better at night. Based on the first 5 months, we had projected that by the end of the story, no one else would still believe in America. And then I'm just going to read two other quick chapters towards the end of the book. So this is starting in chapter 10. I believed the United States was already failing badly. To the highly vulnerable, the fall was staggering. Very few didn't lose. I believed the dead were humiliating me somehow through a long, bitter, restless vision of defeat. Very few stars rise in the hurt. I held a press conference to show that we were serious. The catch was that even we were beyond our reach. I pushed again to move the time to vote, to dissuade particularly those in the cities. The morning gathered hope and cut it in the afternoon. By October, something had changed dramatically in the tenor. We had a more immediate problem, staying alive. My instincts slow and suffered. I knew it was highly unlikely that the midway was near. Possibility was just one bright spot amidst all the troubles. I let loose the rushing dream of red, and the dead were being shown on all 3 networks. The press was beginning to sense our weakness of beleaguered, ashen-faced last days that everyone rushed to witness. Each day drove me crazy. The television, impossible to resist, was only a token, hollow, without reason or sign. I was under intense pressure to become professional, not that I was seriously considering it. I never had a master plan, like a 68-story skyscraper with nothing in it. No strong word or genuinely felt letter to all the thousands of people watching in fear. No little breath of quiet love, almost nothing at all. Politicians, you have to understand, they fold like the tide as a way of getting around the day, full and graciously willing. My plan was to pack my bags and take the next plane to Argentina, Toronto, or Montreal. A major report was released on who was responsible for the astounding chronology of sloppiness, indecision, incompetence, and sheer stupidity. Was it me? The delicate spring poured over. Cracks began appearing in the system, hundreds of tiny cracks, huge gaping holes cut into, cut through, used to make violent new solutions. The renovation had begun, and even the smaller things I noticed, abandoned and half inside plants, had died. The few living, in a way, it was the perfect metaphor, trampled by people paid to fix it. Perhaps a single day is a minor miracle, however we rip it out. Perhaps no earth was enough. There was no room left. The city was beginning to rain soft over the grass. And what struck me was how radically there is no conceivable excuse. I don't know the way to say sorry for this story. Even now, as I write this, I look out the window of my tower and see hundreds of people waiting.